Alright, so we're on book Kappa, and we start off with a translator's note, Kappa 1. Book Kappa is composed of recapitulations of earlier material from the Metaphysics, and also sections from the Physics. There has been much debate about the origin and purpose of the book and about the connection between it and books Beta, Gamma, and Epsilon, which are the sections of the Metaphysics which it mainly recapitulates. In my chapter introductions, I confine myself to indicating the main points of difference between the texts of Kappa and the source text. Chapter 1 recalls the doctrine of Book Alpha, that wisdom is concerned with causes and principles, and then reveals puzzles 1 to 7 of Beta, pages 51 to 3. It makes two additions between puzzles 4 and 5, where the issue whether wisdom should study final causes is moved from its inclusion in the discussion of puzzle 1 in Beta, and between puzzles 5 and 6, where a new problem is inserted as to whether wisdom should study the matter of mathematical entities. And that's the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. It is clear from our first sections that philosophy is a kind of science that deals with principles, for it was in those sections that we engaged in controversy with the claims advanced by others in regard to principles. But this still leaves open the question whether philosophy is to be taken as a single science or as several. An objection to its being taken as a single science is that the domain of a single science is always sets of contraries, whereas principles are not contraries. On the other hand, if it is not a single science, of what kind are those various sciences of which it must be supposed to consist? Which it must be supposed to consist. Here are some other queries. 1. Are the principles of demonstrative reason the domain of a single science or of several? If they belong to a single science, why the science and not any other arbitrarily selected science? If two several sciences, what should the common characteristic of these sciences be supposed to be? 2. Does philosophy concern itself with all substances or not? On the later supposition, there is a problem about ring fencing those with which it is concerned. On the former, there is a problem about how a single science can have to do with a plurality of domains. 3. Does philosophy concern itself solely with substances or also with their accidents? After all, whereas demonstration is available for accidents, it is not for substances. But then, if the sciences are different, of what kind are they each, and which is philosophy? If philosophy is taken as demonstrative, then it must be the science of accidents, whereas if it deals with primary entities, then it must be the science of substances. It is also to be noted that we must not suppose that the science that we are investigating has to do with the causes set out in the physics. Philosophy is not concerned with the final cause, for this is the good, which pertains to questions of action and to things subject to process. And it is also the primary source of process, being as it is the end, whereas with things not subject to process there is no primary source of process. In any case, more generally, there is a puzzle as to whether the science that we are currently investigating ever has to do with perceptible substances, or is rather concerned not with them, but with certain others. If it does not have to do with other substances, then these would be either the forms or the mathematicals. But first off, it is patently the case that there are no forms. Digression. Okay, suppose we say that there are forms. Why is the situation for non-mathematical things for which there are forms not parallel to that for the mathematicals? The point is this: they blithely posit the mathematicals between the forms and perceptibles, as being third entities between the forms and the things round here. But there is no third man or third horse between man or horse itself and particular men and or horses. But then, if we throw out mathematicals, with what sort of items are we to suppose that the mathematician is engaged? He is not, to be sure, concerned with the things round here, none of which is remotely like the sort of things investigated by mathematics. End of digression. And secondly, the science we are after is not about mathematicals either. None of them, you see, is separable. But also, philosophy is not about perceptible substances. They, you see, are prone to destruction. More questions. What is the science that deals with the problems of the matter of the mathematicals? Well, it is not physics. The entire preoccupation of the physicists is with things that contain within themselves a principle of movement and rest. And it is not the science of demonstration, the science of science. The subject of the science is, well, demonstration and science. So it is left to philosophy, our present concern, to be the science of the mathematicals. Is the science we are after to be supposed to be concerned with principles, that is, with those items that are called by some elements? It is generally acknowledged that such things are present in composites, but there is a strong converse inclination to suppose that the science we are after is concerned with universals. Every account, indeed, and every science has to do with universals, and not with lowest types, so that from this point of view, philosophy would be concerned with the highest kinds. And these highest kinds would be being and unity, for it is these that would be most plausibly supposed to comprise all entities, and given their natural primacy, to be closest to principles. In that if they are eliminated, then everything else goes with them. Everything has being and unity. On the other hand, if we suppose that being and unity are kinds, the differentia must of necessity participate in them. But no differentia participates in the genus. So on this line of reasoning, we arrive at the view that they must be treated neither as kinds nor even as principles. On the assumption, again, that the relatively simple is more of a principle than the relatively less simple, and that if the lowest kinds of the genus are simpler than the genera, after all, the former are indivisible, whereas the genera divide into several different species, there would seem in this to be grounds for supposing that the species more than the genera are the principle. On the other hand, the fact that species are conjoined in the elimination of genera makes the latter seem more like principles, on the basis that a principle is that whose elimination entails that of something else. Such is our budget of queries, by no means exhaustive. So we have another translator's note, Kappa 2. This chapter continues and completes the review of the puzzles presented in Beta. The order of presentation, however, is changed, and Puzzle 8, page 54, concerning the existence of supersensible entities, is given a more extensive treatment. That is the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. Back to questions. 4. Should we, or should we not, suppose there to be something over and above particulars? And, if not, is philosophy about particulars? Objection. There is an infinity of particulars. Counter objection. Okay, but the things over and above particulars are genera or species, and philosophy is not about either of these, as we have just seen. In fact, it is a question quite generally whether a philosopher is to suppose that there is separable substance over and above perceptible substances, things round here, or that there is not, and that it is the latter that are the things that are, and that it is with them that philosophy is concerned. It is indeed some other sort of substance that we seem to be after, and this is why we encounter this problem, viz., that of seeing whether there is something separable in itself and not pertaining to any of the perceptibles. 5. If, in addition to perceptible substances, there is some other substance, over against which of the perceptible substances is this other substance set? Why, in fact, is it to be supposed that this substance is to be set over against men rather than horses, or the other animals, or indeed even inanimate things quite generally? But then the introduction of other eternal substances, one for each of the perceptible, perishable substances, would seem to fall outside the pale of common sense. If, on the other hand, the principle for which we are now seeking is not separable from bodies, then what might one more plausibly suppose to be this principle than matter? Well, one response might be that matter does not exist actually, but only potentially, and thus form or shape would seem rather to be a principle, and to be more fundamental than matter. Form or shape, however, is taken to be perishable. And on this basis, there is no eternal, separable per se substance at all. And yet, this is odd. After all, has not a principle and substance of this kind been taken to exist and investigated by the brightest luminaries of philosophy? How indeed is there to be an arrangement of the world at all in the absence of something eternal, separable, and permanent? 6. Suppose then that there is some substance and principle of a nature such as we are currently examining. Suppose that it is a single substance for all things, the same both for eternal and for perishable items. There is now a real difficulty as to why, with the principle being the same, some items falling under the principle are eternal and some absurdly are not. If, however, there is one principle for perishables and another for eternals, and if even that for perishables will itself be eternal, our difficulty will not have been much alleviated. Why? The question now is, if the principle is eternal, are the things that fall under the principle not also eternal? If, however, the principle of perishables is perishable, then there is some other principle for this, and another again for that one, and so on ad infinitum. 7. Suppose alternatively that we posit those principles that are most plausibly thought to be immune from process, to wit being and unity. First off, if we do this, assuming that each of these does not pick out a this something and a substance, how are they to have separable and per se being? Yet such must be the eternal primary principles that we are after. If conversely, both being and unity do display a this something or substance, then all the things that are will be substances, given the predication of being of all things and the predication of unity of several. But it is just plain false that all the things that are substance. 8. How can there be a shred of truth in the assertion that unity is the primary principle and that this is a substance, with number being generated first from unity and matter and this being claimed for a substance? How is one to think of duality and each of the other compound numbers as one? They have no answer to this, and it is not easy to see how they could have. Suppose alternatively that we posit lines and the entities next to them, primary surfaces, as principles. Well, in any event, these are not separable substances, but sections and divisions, some of surfaces, some of bodies, and some points of lines, and by the same token, limits of the same. All these items pertain to other things, none of them being separable. Anyway, how are we to suppose that there is a substance of unity and point? With every substance there is production, but not so with point, given that a point is a division. 9. Every science has to do with universals and the such, but substance is not to be found among the universals, but is rather a this something inseparable, and science is also about principles. So how are we to suppose that the principle is substance? 10. Is there something over and above the thing as a whole, meaning by this the matter and that which is with matter, or not? If, on the one hand, there is not, then what about the fact that all things in matter are perishable? But if, on the other hand, there is, then this must be form or shape. As for form or shape, it is problematic to say in which cases it is something over and above and in which it is not. There are at any rate some cases, such as that of a house, in which it is clear that the form is not separable. 11. Are the principles the same in A, form, B, number? If B, everything will be the same. We have another translator's note, Kappa 3. This chapter recapitulates Book Gamma 1-2, which sets out the various ways in which things can have being while insisting that these all form the domain of a single science, which also studies the main contrarieties of being, and contrasts the metaphysical study of being qua being with the mathematical study of being and quantity, the physical study of being and change, and the dialectical study of the accidental properties of being. That is the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. Being, qua being, taken universally and not in regard to some part of it, is the domain of the science of philosophy. but the accounts of being are several and not after a single fashion. And if these accounts are merely homonymous, lacking any common feature, then being does not form the domain of a single science. For things like that do not constitute a single genus. If, on the other hand, the accounts are based on a common feature, then being would form the domain of a single science. In fact, the accounts of being seem in a way like those of medical and healthy, for each of which there are several accounts. Now there are accounts of this kind for all things, which are as follows. The account of medical makes reference in some way to medical science, and that of healthy in some way to health, and in other cases the reference is to something else, but always to the same thing in each case. So a discourse, say, or a knife is said to be to be medical, by dint of the one's being based on medical science and the other's being useful to it. And it is the same and it is the same with healthy. One thing is called healthy because it is a symptom of health, another because it is productive of it, and this carries over to other cases. And so it is too with the account of all being, for the account of each of the things that are is based on being, an affection of being qua being, or a state of it, or an arrangement, process, or other such. And since there is a reference to a single common thing for everything that is, each of the contraries will also be referred to the primary differentiae and contraries of being. Whether these primary differentiae of being are plurality and unity, or similarity and dissimilarity, or yet others, let's not go into that now. Nothing hangs on the reference of that which is being or to unity, given that even if they are not the same but different, they are interchangeable. What is one is in a way also being, and what is being is in a way also one. Now, since it is for one and the same science to examine each pair of contraries, and in each case the account of the one is derived from the privation of the other. In fact, with some contraries there is a puzzle as to how the account can be thus derived from privation, with those namely for which there is an intermediary, as in justice and justice. It is in all these cases appropriate that the privation not be posited of the whole account, but of the lowest type. For instance, if the just man is observing of the laws by dint of a certain settled disposition, the unjust man will not in all cases be the man deprived of the whole account. Rather, he may be in some way deficient in law observance, it being in this way that the privation applies to him, and the same goes for the other cases. And just as the mathematician is conducting a study into things in abstraction, for his study commences after the removal of all perceptible features, such as weight and lightness and hardness and the contrary of hardness, as also heat and cold and the other perceptible contrarieties, leaving only quantity and continuity in one, two, or three dimensions, and the affections of things qua quantitative and continuous, not contemplating them relative to anything else, and examines on the one hand the mutual relations of some and the features of those relations, and on the other the commensurabilities and incommensurabilities of the others, and of yet others the proportions. But for all that we suppose geometry to be one and the same science for all these, so do things also stand with being. It is for philosophy, and for philosophy alone, to study the accidents of being in so far as it is being, the contrarieties of being qua being. To physics is ascribed the study of things not qua things that are, but qua participants in process. And dialectics and sophistics have, indeed, to do with the accidents of things that are, but not qua things that are, nor about that which is just in so far as it is that which is. It is left, then, to the philosopher to study the items we have mentioned, to the extent that they are as we have said. And since, despite the plurality of accounts, everything that is said to be by virtue of one common feature, and the contraries in the same fashion, they are referred to as the primary contrarieties and differentiae of being, and since it is possible for these to fall under a single science, the puzzle originally cited is resolved, that namely of how there is to be a single science of a plurality of things differing in kind. We have another translator's note, Kappa 4. The text here recapitulated is Gamma 3, which explains that the fundamental axioms of logic fall within the domain of metaphysics, being peculiarly suitable to the generality of the interest in being which is distinctive of metaphysics. That is the end of translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. Also, since the mathematician himself applies common axioms, but does so in a special way, it would seem to fall first to philosophy to examine the principles of these two. For instance, that when equals are subtracted from equals, equals remain is common to all quantities. But mathematics discriminates and conducts a study into a certain part of its proper matter, into lines or angles or numbers or some one of the other quantities, not qua things that are, but just qua each as a continuity in 1, 2, or 3 dimensions. Philosophy, by contrast, does not examine some portion of what is, in respect of the accidents of each such group of things, but contemplates being as the being of each of such things, and physics is in the same boat as mathematics. It studies the accidents and principles of entities, qua participating in process and not qua being. And in contrast, we have said that primary science is the science of these things insofar as they, its subjects, are things that are, and not in regard to any other feature. Hence, both physics and mathematics are to be considered mere parts of total understanding. We have another translator's note, Kappa 5. This chapter recapitulates chapters 4, 3, and 8 of Book Gamma, which contain the remarkable defense of the principle of non-contradiction. That's the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. Now there is a principle in things that are for which illusion is impossible, and whose truth, rather, we cannot fail to acknowledge the principle that it is not possible for the same thing both to be and not to be at one and the same time, or indeed harbor any other such pair of contraries. There can be no demonstration of these things simplicator, but there can be ad hominem. It is not, that is, possible to draw this principle as a conclusion from some more certain principle than it, but that is what it would take for it to be demonstrable simplicator. However, if you have on your hands a guy who is making opposite assertions and you want to show him the falsity of his ways, you are going to have to get out of him some concession which amounts to the principle that it is not possible for the same thing both to be and not to be at one and the same time, even though it may not be thought to be the same. Only in this way can the principle be demonstrated in the face of one who says that it is possible for opposite statements to be true in respect of the same thing. In any case, if any two people are going to have a debate, there has to be some common ground. Without it, what joint basis for discussion will there be? What then is needed is that each of the words used must be familiar and indicate something, not several things, but only one. Or if it does indicate a plurality of things, it must be made clear to which of these things the word is being applied in the context. Given these ground rules, anyone who says that a given thing both is and is not is denying what he is asserting, so that he is denying that the word indicates what it indicates, which is impossible. If then something is indicated by saying that a given thing is, it is impossible for the denial of it to be true in respect of the same thing. On top of that, if the word indicates something and is asserted truly, this must be of necessity. And what is of necessity does not admit of ever not being. Thus, it is not possible for opposite statements to be true in respect of the same thing. And also, if the statement is no more true than the denial, there will be no more truth in saying man than in saying not man. And indeed, it is supposed that if one asserts that a man is not a horse, one is saying something that is either more, or at any rate not less, true than that he is not a man, so that it will also be right to say that the same man is a horse. Our assumption was that opposite statements could be equally truly made. So it turns out that the same man is also a horse or any other animal you like. Where, well, there is no demonstration of these things simplicator, but demonstration is possible to anyone making these suppositions. No doubt, had one questioned Heraclitus himself in this way, we would have forced him to agree that it is never possible for opposite statements to be true with regard to the same things. In fact, he took up this view without understanding what his own position amounted to. Anyway, if his claim is true, then even the following principle will not be true, namely, that it is possible for the same thing at one and the same time both to be and not to be. This is because just as when the statements are discriminated, neither the denial nor the assertion is said more truly in the same way. What with the combined and conjoined statement being like a single assertion, the denial will not be any the more true than the whole considered as an assertion. Finally, if something can be finally, if nothing can be truly asserted, even the following claim would be false. The claim that there is no true assertion, and if there is a true assertion, this is a refutation of what is pretended by the raisers of these objections, being as they are the comprehensive eliminators of all debate. Another translator's note, Kappa 6. This chapter recapitulates chapters 5 to 8 of Book Gamma and continues and completes the recapitulation of the defense of the principle of non-contradiction. Back to the metaphysics, that was the end of the translator's note. There is a certain affinity between what we have just been discussing and the dictum of Protagoras. He remarked that man is the measure of all things, and in saying this, his point was just that whatever is thought by each individual to be the case, most assuredly also is the case for him. But if this is so, it will turn out that the same thing both is and is not, both is evil, say, and is good, and all the other things that can be said of it by means of opposite assertions. After all, very often a certain thing seems beautiful to one group of people and the opposite to another, and it is what each man takes to be the case that is the measure. We can, however, dispose of this riddle if we consider what is the root of this position. In some aspects, it would seem to derive from teaching of the philosophers of nature, and others merely from the circumstance that it is not the case that all men hold the same opinions on all subjects, but rather one group will take a given thing to be pleasant, another the contrary. Now the claim that nothing is produced from what is not, and everything from what is one up, to which pretty nearly all of those who have concerned themselves with nature have signed. But then nothing white can be produced from what is completely white, and in no respect not white. So the white thing produced is produced from what is not white. So the argument goes, it is produced from something that is not, unless there was originally one and the same thing that was both white and not white. No need to linger long over this. The physics has already dealt with the way in which things are produced from that which is not, and the way in which they are produced from that which is. It is, in any event, the policy of the simpleton to attend with equal relish to the opinions and whimsies of those locked in mutual controversy. It is patently the case that one or other of them must be in error. This is clear even from sensory occurrences, for it is never the case that the same thing appears pleasant to one group and the contrary to another, unless one group or the other is corrupted and impaired with respect to the discriminating sensorium for the flavors in question. But if this is the case, then we should embrace the other group as our measure, while rejecting the victims of impairment, and the point carries over to good and evil, beautiful and ugly, etc., etc. In fact, there is no difference between Protagoreanism and saying this: if you stick your finger under your eye and make single things seem to be two, then they are two. just because they seem to be two, and also one, because if you do not thus distort your vision, then what is one you see as one. The objection to be made here, in fact, is more radical still. It is that you cannot take the fact that things round here appear to change and never to stay in the same condition, and use it as the basis for assaying an evaluation of the way things are in truth. If it is the way things are in truth that you are after, you must start with things that are always in the same condition, and which never undergo change. Of which kind are the contents of the heavens. They do not appear like so and so at one point, and like such and such at another, but are ever the same and have no part in any change. Also this, if there is a process, there is something undergoing the process, and everything proceeds from something to something else. So what undergoes the process must at first be in that from which it proceeds, and later not in that from which it proceeds. Must proceed to something else and be produced in that. But this means that the contents of the contradictions do not simultaneously truly apply to it. Pace, our friends, if too the things round here undergo continuous flux and process in respect of quantity, which let us suppose, though it is not strictly the case, why should they not enjoy permanence in respect of quality? You see, the claim that contradictory predications can be made of the same thing would seem not least to be derived from the assumption that bodies have no permanence with respect to quantity. This is taken to justify the remark that the same thing both is and is not 4 cubits long. However, substance is relative to quality, and this of a defined nature, whereas quantity is of an undefined nature. What about when a medic orders this particular food to be served to the patients? Why do the patients accept it? Why, we might ask, is it any more the case that this food is, say, bread, than that it is not? So it would not make any difference whether they ate it or not. In practice, of course, the patients do indeed accept the prescribed food, and in so doing betray their belief that they have the truth on the issue, and that it is, as a matter of fact, the prescribed food. But this would be a ludicrous procedure if there really were no permanency in the nature of perceptibles, and all natures were at all times the playthings of process and flux. And anyway, if we are always changing and never remaining the same, it is hardly surprising if we are like sick people and things never seem the same to us. Sick people, to be sure, by dint of the fact that they are not in the same dispositional condition, and when they are well, do not feel that perceptible things are the same. But this does not mean that the objects of perception themselves need have a share in change. For all that they produce other sensations in sick people, and not the same ones. So things must be like this, it would seem, for us too, if the constant change alleged in fact occurs. If, on the other hand, we do not change but continue to be the same people, then there would be something in us that persists. There are, of course, also those who reach these exotic conclusions a priori. Now their position is hard to rebut or rebut. What you need is that they should accept some statement for which they no longer require a reason. Such must be the basis of any argument and demonstration. It is the policy of assuming nothing that destroys discussion and indeed rationality in general. Against anyone who adopts this stance, reason is consequently not a weapon. But if someone is in a bud of a muddle because of the received riddles, it is easy to give him an answer to remove the sources of his confusion, as has already been made clear. It is then quite clear from the discussion that contradictory assertions about the same thing cannot both be true at a single time, nor indeed can contraries, given that all contrariety is based on privation, as a reduction to principle of the accounts of contraries makes clear. In the same spirit, no intermediate state could be predicated of one and the same thing as a contrary. If something is white, it would be wrong to say that it is neither black nor white, since then it would both be and not be white, since the second conjunct which is the contradiction of white, truly applies to it. It cannot then be right to adopt the position either of Heraclitus or indeed of Anaxagoras. If it were, contraries would turn out to be predicable of the same thing. You see, when Anaxagoras says that there is a share of everything in everything, he is denying that anything is any more sweet, say, than bitter, and so for all the other contraries, if everything is indeed present in everything, not just potentially, but actually, and in a discriminable manner, by the same token, it is not possible that all assertions could be false or that all assertions could be true. This is shown both by the This is shown both by the many other embarrassments that arise out of this position, and in particular because if, on the one hand, they are all false, it would not be true to say even that they are all false, and on the other, if they are all true, it would not be false to say that all are false. We have another translator's note, Kappa 7. This chapter recapitulates chapter 1 of book Epsilon. It is one of the closest recapitulations in Kappa. That is the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. Every science is on the hunt for certain principles and causes for each of the items that fall in its domain. Consider medicine and PE. Consider, in fact, any of the other sciences, whether productive or mathematical. Each of these sciences circumscribes some kind of thing as its domain and endeavors to get to grips with it. It assumes that things of this kind exist and have being, but it does not study them qua things that are. There is another science that does this, and it is different from any of these. Each of the sciences to which we have referred assumes in some way the what it is for each kind, and then tries to show what follows from this. With the appropriate degree of precision, the assumption of the what it is takes place in some cases through perception and others by hypothesis. So, from an inductive argument on these lines, it can be shown that there is no demonstration of substance and the what it is. Now there is a science that deals with nature, and clearly it will be different from either a practical or a productive science. For with productive science, the principle of process, be it a skill or some other capacity, is in the producer, not the product. And similarly, with the practical science, the process is rather in the subjects than in the objects of action. In contrast to both, the science of the student of nature is concerned with those things that have within themselves the principle of their processes, and this shows us that physical science must be neither practical nor productive but theoretical, assuming this trichotomy to be exhaustive. Now, it is a requirement on each of the sciences that in some way or other it cognize the what it is and take this as its principle. And so we must not overlook the way in which the student of nature is to provide a definition and how he is to take the account of substance, whether on the snub or on the concave model. Of these two, the account of snub is given with the matter of the thing, whereas that of concave is given without matter. For snubness is produced in a nose, so that the account of it is studied with the nose. And snub is concave nose, and this shows that the account of flesh and eye and the other bodily parts is in all cases to be given with the matter. But there is also a science of that which has being qua possessed of being inseparable. So we must decide whether this science is to be considered the same as the science of nature, or rather different. Well, the science of nature has to do with those things that have a principle of process within themselves, whereas mathematics is a theoretical science and is indeed a science of permanent things, but not of separable things. So there is some science different from either of these, which is about what has separable being free from process. If indeed there be any such substance, a substance that is, which is separable and unprocessed, and unprocessed, and that there is, we shall endeavor to show. But just suppose that among the things that are, there is some nature of this kind. In this, if anywhere, would we find divinity. This would be the primary and fundamental principle, and this shows that there are three kinds of theoretical science: physics, mathematics, and theology. And the highest kind of science is the theoretical kind. And of theoretical sciences, the highest is the last in our list. It has to do with the most valuable of the things that are, and it is the proper object of a science that determines its relative excellence. A question that remains is whether or not we should consider that the science of being qua being is a science of the universal. After all, whereas each of the mathematical sciences is concerned with one delimited kind, universal mathematics is concerned with all kinds. So if natural substances are primary among the things that are, then so too would the science of nature be primary among the sciences. But if there is some other nature and substance separable and immune to process, then the science of it must both be different and also prior to physics, and by dint of being prior, universal. We have another translator's note, Kappa 8. This chapter recapitulates the remainder of Book Epsilon. It adds some remarks from the physics on the subject of chance, which have a clear relevance to the treatment of accidental being. That is the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. Given that there is a plurality of styles of account of being simplicator, and that one of these is the account of being in terms of an accident, we ought first to have a look at what is in this manner. Well, it is at least clear that none of the received sciences takes the accidental as its domain. It is not the business of architecture, for instance, to worry about what is destined to befall those who make use of a house, pondering as it might be, whether their life in it will turn out hard or the reverse. Nor indeed are such concerns any business of weaving, cobbling, or the concoction of sauces. No, each of these sciences considers what is special to it in each case, its own proprietary objective. Or consider the following pearl. When a man is musical and becomes grammatical, that man will be both those two things at the same time, not having been them before, but then whatever is, without having always been, must have become, so that our friend must have become both musical and grammatical at the same time. I take it that among those activities which are generally taken to be sciences, there is not one that seriously looks into this sort of thing. Oh, except, of course, sophistics. Sophistry has taken out an exclusive franchise on the accidental, and maybe Plato was not so way off line when he made out that the sophist devotes his life's work to the non-entity. In fact, it is not even possible for there to be a science of the accidental, something that you get to understand when you try to sort out what on earth the accidental after all is. Now, it is our settled position that everything either one is always and of necessity, and the necessity here is not that of any force, but that rather which we employ in the business of demonstration. Or 2 is for the most part, or 3 is neither for the most part nor always, but rather as it so happens. An example of the last case would be the occurrence of chilly weather in high summer. This is not, I take it, something that occurs either always and of necessity or for the most part, and yet it could happen from time to time. Now it is precisely the accidental that occurs, but neither always nor of necessity nor for the most part. There is a statement for you of what the accidental is, and there should be little obscurity as to why there is no science of such a beast. The field of any science is what is either always or for the most part, and the accidental falls under neither of these two heads. It is also clear that there are no causes and principles of the accidental, such as there are for what is per se. Were there such, everything would be of necessity. For if X is if Y is, and Y is if Z is, and the occurrence of Z is a matter not of chance but of necessity, then that of which Z was the cause will also be of necessity, right down to the so-called ultimate effect, which, however, was in this case ex hypothesi accidental. So everything will be of necessity, with a thing's being whichever of two ways it happens, and the possibility of something's being or not being deleted wholesale from the totality of things that happen, even if the cause be supposed not indeed to be, but to be becoming the same consequences will follow. Everything will still happen of necessity. Tomorrow's eclipse, say, will occur if X occurs, and X will occur if Y occurs, and Y if Z. And in this way, if we count back over the finite time between now and tomorrow, we will eventually get to the present state of affairs, so that, given the existence of this, everything after it will occur of necessity, and so everything happens of necessity. Now a thing can be by dint of being true and accidental. Here the first feature derives from a conjunction of thinking and is indeed an affection of thought. Hence the absence of an inquiry into the principles of what is in this way, whereas principles are sought for what is externally inseparably, whereas the other accidentality is not necessary but indefinite. Its causes chaotic and without limit. As for one thing's being for another, this is something to be found among things produced by nature or by thought. And when one of such things occurs by accident, it is deemed to be luck. In fact, just as that which can be either per se or accidental, the same applies to a cause. Luck, then, is an accidental cause among things occurring for something else in which rational choice is involved, with the consequence that luck and thought are in the same line of business. After all, there can be no choosing without thought. Even so, the causes of the outcomes of luck are indefinite, which is why luck is inscrutable to human reason. Causation by accident and of nothing simplicator. Luck, be it also noted, is good when the outcome is good, and bad when the outcome is bad, amounting, when the outcome is on the grand scale, to downright good or bad fortune. Of course, nothing accidental is prior to something which is per se, and so no accidental cause has priority either. So even if luck or the automatic are the cause of the world, mind and nature are prior causes still. We have another translator's note, Kappa 9. Chapters 9 to 12 of Kappa are not recapitulations of the metaphysics, but excerpts from the physics. They mainly have to do with the principal subject of that work, process, and change. Their relevance to the central issues of the metaphysics is far from clear. The present chapter discusses process in connection with the notions of potentiality and actuality. The excerpts are taken from Physics 3, 1 to 3. That's the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. There are things now that have being only in actuality, things that have being in potentiality, and things that have being in potentiality and actuality. The first of these are this somethings, the second quantities, the third from the others. And apart from objects, there is no process, given that change always takes place through the categories of being, and that there is no common thing above them, and not in any single category. And there are two ways in which each category belongs to every entity. Take the category of thisness. Thisness comes either as shape or form, or as privation of the form. And with quality, or we have on the one hand white, say, and on the other black. With quantity, the complete and the incomplete, with movement upwards and downwards. And we also have light and heavy. Thus there are as many species of process and change as there are of being. And if we discriminate for each kind of thing between what is in potentiality and what is in entelechy, then I am calling the actualization of what is in potential, qua a thing just of that kind, a process. And that this is on the right lines can be shown as follows. When something potentially constructed, qua being just what we say to be potentially constructed, is in actualization. What is happening is that it is being constructed, and this is the construction process. The two, learning, curing, walking, hopping, growing old, and maturing. The process is undergone when the entelechy as such is neither sooner nor later. It is therefore the entelechy of the potential being, just when being in entelechy is actualized, and not as itself, but as a subject of process, that is process. Let me say a word or two about qua here. The bronze, I take it, is potentially a statue, but this does not mean that the entelechy of bronze qua bronze is a process, for the what it was to be that thing is not the same for bronze in a particular potentiality, since if they were the same simplicator in terms of its account, then the entelechy of bronze would be a sort of process. In fact, they are not the same, as can be shown by considering contraries. A potentiality for health and a potentiality for sickness are not the same. Were they the same, so too would being healthy and being sick be, but rather the subject, which is both healthy and sick, be it moisture or be it blood, is what is one and the same. So given that these are not the same, any more than color is the same as the visible, it is the entelechy of the potential qua potential that is a process. We have shown, I fancy, that this is so, and that process occurs when the entelechy as such is present, neither sooner nor later. After all, everything is capable of sometimes being actualized and sometimes not. See, if our potential construct qua potential construct, and it is the actualization of the potential construct qua potential construct that is the process of construction. Surely the actualization is either just this, the process or the house. However, when the house is, the potential construct is not, and it is the potential construct that undergoes the process of construction. There is no way round it, then. The actualization is the process of construction, and the process of construction is a process. The two are processes. There are at least two reasons for accepting all this: the consensus sapientium on the subject and the sheer difficulty of framing any other definition of process. For a start, it would not be possible to subsume it under any other class of things. This much is shown by the consensus. Process has been variously dubbed otherness, inequality, and non-being, but process is not a necessary feature of any of these. Also, it is no more the case that change occurs to these things, or from them that it occurs to or from their opposites. Now, the reason for subsuming process under these things is that it is thought to be something indefinite. The principles is in the second of the two columns of contraries being private and therefore indefinite. None of them is either a this or a such or an item in any of the categories. And the reason why it is thought to be indefinite is that it cannot be subsumed under either the potentiality or the actuality of entities. Neither what is potentially a certain amount nor what is actually a certain amount undergoes process of necessity. On the other hand, process is thought to be a kind of actualization, though an incomplete one, and the reason for this is that the potentiality of which it is the actualization is incomplete. This is what makes it so hard to understand what process is. It must be subsumed either under privation or under potentiality or under actualization simplicator. But it appears that none of these subsumptions is possible. So all that is left is the account that we have given, the actualization or non-actualization. We have set out this may be hard to discern, but there is no reason why it should not have being. It is also clear that process is in the thing processed, since it is the entelechy of the process induced by the processing agent, and the actualization of the processing agent is none other than that of the thing processed. It has to be the entelechy of both being and of it has to be the entelechy of both agent and object for the following reasons. A thing is an agent of processing by dint of being capable of processing, and a processor by dint of actualization. But it is the object of processing that it is capable of actualizing, and so the actualization of both is one in the same way as there is the same gap from 1 to 2 and from 2 to 1, or as an incline is the same as a decline, and yet being is not one for them. That is the way in which also the actualization of the processor and of the thing processed is one. So we have another translator's note, Kappa 10. This chapter consists of excerpts from Physics 3, 4 to 7. Their topic is the impossibility of the actual existence of the infinite, to which reference has already been made in Book Theta. That's the end of the translation note. Back to the metaphysics. Now, the infinite is either something that cannot be crossed because it does not lie in its nature to be crossed, just as it does not lie in the nature of the voice to be visible, or something that permits only incomplete crossing, or something which hardly permits crossing at all, or something which, although it lies in its nature, does not in fact permit crossing or contain a limit. Further, something may be infinite, either by addition or by subtraction or by both. Now, it is not possible for the infinite to be separable from perceptibles and a per se something. Assume that it is neither a magnitude nor a plurality, and that infinity itself is its substance, not an accidental feature. In that case, it will be indivisible, given that the divisible is either magnitude or plurality, but if it is indivisible, then it is not infinite, except in the way that voice is invisible. But that is not the account usually given of infinity, nor is it an infinity like that we are studying. We are studying the infinite as that which cannot be crossed. Moreover, how can the infinite be per se, unless number and magnitude also, of which the infinite is an affection, are per se? Also, if the infinite has being as an accidental feature, then it would not qua infinite be an element of the things that are, just as the invisible is no element of spoken language, for all that the voice is invisible. It is also clear that the infinite cannot have being in actuality. If it could, any part taken from it would be infinite. After all, if the infinite is indeed a substance and not a predicable, the what it was to be that thing for the infinite and the infinite are the same. So either the infinite is indivisible, or, if you can have parts of it, it must be divisible into infinites. But it is, I take it, not on for the same thing to consist of a plurality of infinites, and the infinite will be a part of the infinite just as much as air is a part of air. If it is a substance in principle, this shows us two things. You cannot have parts of the infinite, and the infinite is indivisible. But the infinite but the infinite with being in entelechy cannot be like this, since it must be some quantity, so the infinite must be present as an accidental feature. But if this is the way in which it is present, then it has already been said that it cannot be a principle. It will be whatever it is an accidental feature of what is the principle, whether this be air or an even number. Now, our investigation of the infinite is universal in character, but it can also be shown as follows that the infinite is not to be found among perceptibles. Let the account of body be bounded by planes. But then there can be no infinite body, either perceptible or intuitable. Nor indeed can there be a number which is separable and infinite, given that it is either number or the possessor of number that is denumerable. Now this can be shown by the following considerations, which are naturalistic in character. The infinite cannot be either a compound body or simple. 1. The infinite cannot be a compound body. Reason. The elements are limited in plurality. The contraries must be equal, and there cannot be some one among them which is infinite. If the potentiality of one of the two contrary bodies falls even the slightest bit below that of the other, then that which is limited will be destroyed by the infinite. And it is not possible for each of them to be infinite, given that body is what has extension in every direction, and the infinite is the limitlessly extended, so that if the infinite is a body, it will be infinite in every direction. 2. The infinite cannot be a single body. The infinite cannot be a single and simple body. Reason. It cannot be, as claimed by some, a thing over and above the elements, from which they produce these, nor can it have being simplicator. There is no such body over and above the elements. Every thing can be dissolved back into that of which it is composed, and there is no evidence of any such ultimate component beyond the simple bodies. Nor can the infinite be fire or any other of the elements. For leaving aside any one of them's being infinite, it is not possible for the entire universe, even if it were to be limited, either to be or to become some one of them. Recall Heraclitus' claim that from time to time everything becomes fire. In fact, the same reasoning applies to the infinite as to the one introduced over and above the elements by the philosophers of nature. After all, everything changes from one contrary to another, from hot, say, to cold. Also, a perceptible body has some location, and both whole and part are in the same place, as with the whole and a part of the earth. So, if the supposed infinite body is of the same kind as its parts, it will be either immune from or constantly subject to process motion. And this is impossible because there is no reason for it to move either up or down or anywhere any more than anywhere else. Suppose, for instance, that there was this sod which was part of any infinite body. Where is this to have either process motion or stasis? For the place of the body that is of common kind with it is infinite. But is this sod when to occupy the entire place? And how, pray, is this to happen? And what are stasis and process motion to be for the sod? Perhaps it is in a state of stasis everywhere? But then how is it to undergo process motion? Maybe it is in a state of process motion everywhere. But then how is it ever to be in a state of stasis? But then suppose that the universe is dissimilar from its parts. In that case, the places of whole and part are also dissimilar. So the body of the universe A will not be a unity except by contact, and B will be either limited or infinite in type. Now, it is not possible for them to be limited in type because then those of some types would be infinite, and those of others not assuming an infinite universe, so fire, say, or water would be infinite. But any such infinite element would spell the destruction of its contraries. If, on the other hand, the universal parts are infinite and simple, then so too are their places infinite, and there will be an infinity of elements. If conversely this is impossible, and places are limited, then the universe too must be limited. Still more generally, it is not possible for an infinite body to have being and for there to be a place for bodies. If every perceptible body has either weight or lightness, for such a body will be born either towards the middle or upwards, and neither of these can happen to either the whole or a half of the infinite. After all, how is it to be divided? For that matter, how is half of the infinite to be down and half up, or half at the edge and half in the middle? Also, every perceptible body is in a place, and the types of place are 6, none of which can be in an infinite body. Basically, if it is impossible for there to be infinite place, then there cannot be infinite body either, because what is in place is somewhere, and this indicates either up or down or one of the other directions, and each such direction is a limitation. The infinite is not the same as a single nature in magnitude, process, motion, and time, but the posterior is said to be infinite relative to the prior. Process motion, for instance, is said to be infinite relative to the magnitude through which the process of motion, alteration, or increase occurs, and time is said to be infinite because of the process motion that occurs in it. We have another translator's note, Kappa 11. This chapter is an excerpt from Physics 5:1. Its subject is the different kinds of change. That's the end of the translator's note. Back to the metaphysics. When something undergoes a change, this can either be accidental to it, as, for instance, it is accidental if the musical thing goes through the change of walking, or it is said to change simplicator by dint of a change to something in it. Examples of the latter are things Examples of the latter are things that change relative to their parts. The body, for instance, becoming healthy because the eye does. There is, however, also something which is in itself the primary undergoer of process. This is what is susceptible of process per se, and the same trichotomy applies also to the processor or processor. Its processing can be either accidental or part relative or per se. And there is also something which is the primary processor, as well as the undergoer of process and the period and initial and end states of the process. By contrast, the types affections, and place into which the processing of the processed occurs do not themselves undergo processing. Examples are knowledge and heat, and of course it is not heat, say, which is a process, but heating. In any case, non-accidental change is not to be found in all things, but only among contraries and the intermediate state, and in connection with contradiction, as can be shown by induction. Now that undergoes changes either from something positive to something positive, or from something negative to something negative, or from something positive to something negative, or from something negative to something positive. And here, something positive is to be taken as what is reviewed by an affirmative assertion. It follows that there must be three changes, since a move from negative to negative is not a change, there being no opposition, given that there is neither contrariety nor contradiction. Now, change from negative to positive involving contradiction is production. Production, simplicator from change, simplicator, particular production from particular change. But of course, there is a plurality of accounts of non-being, and neither non-being involving composition nor non-being involving division can undergo process. Nor can non-being involving potentiality, which is the opposite of that which is simplicator, where there is accidental processing of the not white or not good, since a man, say, could be not white, but there is no way in which a non-this simplicator could undergo a process. So the non-being cannot undergo process, but then it is also impossible for production to be a process. It is, after all, the non-being that gets produced. We can go on saying till we are blue in the face that the non-being is produced accidentally. It is still the case that non-being is present in what is produced simplicator by the same token. What is not cannot be in a state of stasis either. So we are already in trouble here. But there is another problem, assuming that everything that undergoes process is in place and that the non-being is not in place. If it were, it would have to have a location. And it also turns out that destruction is not a process. The contrary of a process is either process or stasis, but the contrary of destruction is production. And since every process is a kind of change, and the three changes are those that we have specified, and of these, those involving production and destruction are not processes. And since processes involve contradiction, the inevitable upshot is that only positive change is process. Further, positives are either contrary or intermediate. Let us take even privation to be a contrary, and are reviewed by an affirmative assertion, such as asserting something to be naked or toothless or black. Another translator's note, Kappa 12. This chapter is an excerpt from Physics 5, 1-3. Its subject is the connection between movement and the categories. Back to the metaphysics, that's the end of the translator's note. If the categories are distributed into substance, quality, place, action and affection, relation and quantity, there must be three processes, those of quality, of quantity, and of place. There will not, on the other hand, be any process relative to substance, since nothing is contrary to substance, and there will be no process relative to relation, inasmuch as when one of two relational items changes, it is possible that the relation can no longer be truly asserted of the other, even though it has not changed a whit, so that the processing of such things is accidental, and there will be no process relative to what acts or is acted on, nor to the processor and thing processed. Because there is no process of process, nor production of production, nor, more generally, change of change, if there were to be process of process, it would have to be in one of the following two ways. A, the process might underlie a process. For instance, just as a man, say, can undergo a process in changing from white to black, so too the process might undergo heating, say, or cooling, or might change in place or increase. But this is clearly impossible. Process is not the sort of thing that can underlie, or B, something else which does underlie, might change into some other type of thing, just as a man can change from a state of illness to a state of health. This too, however, is impossible, except accidentally, for every process is change from one thing to another. So too are production and destruction, except that these are changes into things opposed in one way, and process is change into things opposed in another. So at one and the same time, something both changes from health to illness, and changes from this very change to another. So clearly, if something has become ill, it will have changed into whatever change is relevant. Okay, it could also be in stasis, changing too on each occasion, not into an arbitrary change, and the new change will also be from something particular into something else. So it will in fact be the opposite change, normal development. However, this is clearly accidental. It is like a change from remembering to forgetting by dint of the fact that to which these states pertain undergoes a change, at one point towards knowledge and at another towards ignorance. There will also be an infinite regress if we are to allow change of change and production of production. So if something is the case with the posterior change, it must also be with the prior. For instance, if production simplicator was once produced, then so will what is being produced have been produced. So what is produced simplicator was not yet in being, but what was being produced as what is being produced was. And indeed this was at some point in a state of being produced, so that at that point it was not yet getting produced as something else. In any case, there is no primary item of an infinite sequence, so that in this case there will be no primary item and thus no subsequent one either. So nothing could get produced, undergo process, or change in any way. So again, this same thing must have the opposite process available, and also stasis, as well as production and destruction. So what is produced once it has been produced as what is produced will be destroyed. After all, it cannot be destroyed just as soon as it is being produced, nor later, given that what is destroyed must have being. In any case, anything that gets produced and changed must have underlying matter. So what will this be in this case, in the way that the altered body or soul is? What will be the what is produced as process or production? What too is the end state of the process? For the processing or production of a thing from one thing to another should be something. But how is this to come about? For learning will not be the production of learning, and so nothing will be the production of production either. There is, as we said, no process of substance, relation, or action and affection, so it remains that process is relative to quality, quantity, and location, for each of which there is contrariety, and quality here is not intended as quality in substance. After all, the differentia is a quality, but rather quality as affection, in terms of which something is said to be affected or immune to affection. And what is immune to process is either what is quite generally incapable of undergoing process, or what can only undergo it with difficulty and over a long period of time, or what commences slowly to be processed, or what is naturally constituted to undergo process and is capable of being processed, but is not being processed in the time, place, and manner for which it is constituted to be processed. It is only this among the things immune to process that I call the thing in stasis, for stasis is contrary to process, so that it must be a privation in the recipient of process. Things are together in place if they are in a single primary place, and apart if they are in different primary places. And things whose extremities are together are in contact, and the intermediate is that into which it is natural for what undergoes change to arrive before changing to the other extreme, assuming continuous natural change. Contrary in place is something most distant in a straight line, and something is sequential if it is after the beginning, as defined in terms of position or type or in some other way, which none of the things of the same kind between it and that to which it is between it and that to which it is sequential, such as lines for a line, points for a point, and houses for a house. There is nothing to stop something of a different kind being between them, for the sequential is sequential to something and a posterior thing. one is not sequential to two, nor is the first day of the month sequential to the second. And if something is both sequential and in contact, it is contiguous, yeah. And since all change occurs among opposites, and since opposites are contraries and contradiction, and since there is no midpoint of a contradiction, it is clear that the intermediate occurs among contraries, and the continuous is a kind of contiguity. I say that things are continuous when the boundary of each of them, by which they are in contact and held together, is one and the same, so that clearly continuity occurs in those things from which it is natural for some unity to arise by virtue of their contact. It is clear that the primary here is the sequential. The sequential does not have to be in contact, but anything that is in contact is sequential, and if something is continuous, then it is in contact. But it can easily be in contact without being continuous. And for things for which contact is impossible, there can be no conjunction of natures. That is why a point is not the same as a unit, for points, but not units, are capable of contact. Units have only sequentiality, and there can be something between 2 points, but not between 2 units. And that is the end of book Kappa. The next book is book Lambda, where Aristotle will talk about his theology. And that will be a spicy book. So, see ya.